Hi, welcome back. I'm Anna. I'm a clinical psychology doctoral candidate. On this channel, we talk about real-life applications to psychology, and today actually we're starting a new type of playlist, which I think I will do very regularly. Probably at least one of my 2 videos every week will be in this style, where I go in depth into one study that's particularly fascinating on a topic that you all are interested in. I'll probably put that in the polls when I'm thinking about what topics to choose, and just exploring how that applies to our lives and how we can make sense of these research findings. Because I know in the past I've done like literature review style videos with like compiling a bunch of different articles, and that's good. Like, it's good to get a sense of what the research says on a certain topic, but I think it's harder for people to retain that information. I know for me personally, once I finish a video, it's like out of my head, out of sight, out of mind. I completely forget about it, and I can only imagine for you guys as well, it's probably similar. So I want to focus on shorter, more concise videos where we go into one specific, really interesting research study that's peer-reviewed, of course, and scientific, empirical. And so I think this playlist is going to be called Research Relayed. I think so. I think one of you all, when I posted in the community post about like what should I title it, had that suggestion, and I really like it. I love alliteration, so thank you very much to whoever suggested that. So today's video will be about narcissism, jealousy, and psychological abuse. There's a lot of misinformation on the internet about narcissism these days, so I figured I would stop complaining about it and just actually start putting scientific information on this topic instead. So today's video is about a study from 2020 by Ponti, Kinasi, and Tani. The citation is in the description box if you want to examine it yourself. This research study wanted to examine whether psychological abuse in couples varies depending on the type of narcissism that a person has, so vulnerable or grandiose, and the role of romantic jealousy in all of this. So a little bit of background information in case you're not familiar with these terms. Vulnerable narcissism is a narcissist that tends to be timid, embarrassed, anxious, very shaky self-esteem, very easily rattled, heavily depends on external feedback and the reactions of other people towards them. This type of narcissism is associated with reduced happiness, higher numbers of negative emotions than grandiose narcissists experience. They have similar rates in both men and women for vulnerable narcissism. And the difference between vulnerable narcissism and social anxiety, in case you're wondering, because they sound kind of similar based on this description, is that social anxiety usually results in self-abuse, like mentally beating yourself up for what an embarrassment you are, whereas vulnerable narcissism is usually externalized on other people, as we'll see in the findings of this study. So that's vulnerable narcissism. And grandiose narcissism is characterized by primarily arrogance, like overestimating how good you are at something or bragging a good deal. Grandiosity, like having these grand fantasies of success, beauty, money, etc. Egoism, focusing very much on the self, kind of like a child would. Lack of empathy, not considering how other people might feel, especially in relation to your own behaviors. And the use of maladaptive strategies to increase their opinions of themselves. So for grandiose narcissists, when their self-esteem is threatened, they might explicitly self-praise or devalue the other person. Like, no, I'm actually number one, I'm the best. Or, what do you know? You don't know anything. You don't know anything about this topic. Grandiose narcissism, unlike vulnerable narcissism, is more frequent in men than it is in women. So the two do share some traits. Obviously, they both fall under the diagnostic criteria of narcissistic personality disorder, which are similar traits, but some of the ones that they share are grandiose fantasies, a sense of entitlement, and the exploitation of others through things like manipulation, antagonism, etc. And then psychological abuse, as defined by this study, is a sense of dominance, like I can sleep with other people, but you can't. Control, like controlling what to wear, where to go, who to see. Isolation from your support system usually. Physical threats, like you make me so mad, I want to punch a hole in this wall. And criticism, like why is your hair like that? Why didn't you do the dishes? Why do you talk so funny? So all of these result in significant and negative consequences for the person on the receiving end. So that could look psychological, physical, relational, their overall well-being is decreased. And romantic jealousy, I think we all already know what romantic jealousy is. It tends to be higher in women, interestingly. Possibly this is related to the fact that men have higher infidelity rates, or the socialization of men to get away with things that might make women feel insecure or jealous in a relationship, whereas women get shamed for anything that would deem them a harlot or, you know, a whole other host of slurs. So that's a little bit of background about the important terms in this study, and let's just go into the findings. So the sample was 473 university students in Italy, so they were between the ages of 18 and 30, and they were all in a romantic relationship. The researchers assessed for vulnerable narcissism, grandiose narcissism, and jealousy, as well as the perpetration of psychological abuse. So whether they reported that they were emotionally abusing their partner. In line with previous studies, they found that women reported higher levels of romantic jealousy than men. They also found that grandiose narcissism was higher in men than it was in women, and there was no difference for vulnerable narcissism as far as gender was concerned. The way they explain this is that grandiose narcissism tends to reflect specific psychological characteristics that are more typical in a male population, such as aggressiveness, leadership, or unethical and abusive behavior, while women face much tougher sanctions when displaying dominant and aggressive behaviors in comparison to men. Something that I've been talking about recently is how much female CEOs that mess up are given a lot more scrutiny and coverage than male CEOs that screw up, whereas female CEOs are kind of an exception in the first place, let alone the ones that actually screw up. It's much more expected and kind of normalized that male CEOs are going to have unethical or exploitative behavior, whereas women get kind of put under scrutiny for it. Overall, they found an equal amount of psychological abuse between men and women, unlike other types of abuse where men tend to be overwhelmingly the perpetrators in relationships. They also found pretty high rates of abuse in the sample, which is not really surprising because they mentioned that young Western people going through transitional periods tend to actually be quite emotionally abusive with their partners. And so their main takeaway, their main finding was that the two forms of narcissism were linked to the perpetration of psychological abuse, but they did so in different ways. So vulnerable narcissism was indirectly linked to psychological abuse through romantic jealousy. So the vulnerable narcissists experienced separation signals, which then led to greater distress at the time of the separation, and therefore hypervigilance to potential threats, jealousy, and then eventually abusive behavior toward their partner. On the other hand, grandiose narcissistic partners were directly psychologically abusive towards their romantic partners. These individuals felt kind of indifferent to their partner's feelings and had difficulty understanding the impact of their behavior on other people, and so they resorted to tactics such as isolation, denigration, disdain, and control of their partner in order to keep their own self-image high and to maintain dominance in the relationship. So in other words, vulnerable narcissists were found to abuse their partners because of jealousy, whereas grandiose narcissists abused their partners because of lack of empathy and the desire to propel their self-esteem up. Both are essentially due to their narcissism because their inability to self-regulate their self-esteem and their emotions. But it's more indirect for vulnerable narcissists for whom jealousy plays a really important mediating role. And they found no differences for this finding in particular across gender. So the real life applications that we can learn from this, first of all, both types of narcissism, vulnerable and grandiose, have been found to be associated with psychological abuse towards one's romantic partner. So if you are picking out a partner, you should be aware that individuals with this type of a personality could have a higher chance of psychologically abusing you. For partners with vulnerable narcissism who have very low self-esteem and are constantly playing the victim card and always feel wronged by the world and feel entitled to dominating because of that, jealousy may be a major point of contention in your relationship with such a person. And it may end up in them trying to control you, demean you, isolate you, because they fear that they're going to lose you and therefore take a hit to their self-esteem. So for example, this could look like if you tell your partner, I'm going out for drinks with my coworkers, I'll be an hour late getting home, they might feel jealous and threatened, struggle to self-regulate their self-esteem. They might say, what do you mean? Who are you going with? Why do you have to go? And then they might go into Can't you just stay home with me? I hate how you make me feel so unimportant. Why can't you ever do something nice for me? And then it might go into, fine, go. You just want to flirt with all your coworkers anyway, just like I thought. See how they might go from activated jealousy to increasingly abusive behavior when they're unable to regulate that jealousy. Whereas for partners with grandiose narcissism, those who act like they have very high self-esteem and seem arrogant, grandiose, and callous, jealousy may not be actually a major issue in your relationship with them, but they may still psychologically abuse you by trying to isolate you, denigrate you, treat you with disdain, try to control you for the purpose of maintaining the upper hand in the relationship and therefore preserve their sense of superiority. So the same situation, you telling them, I'm going out for drinks with my coworkers, I'll be an hour late getting home, they might not necessarily feel jealous, but rather just go straight into abuse. Like, you're such a slut. Who cares about your coworkers? You should want to hang out with me instead. What am I expected to do for dinner? I thought you were going to cook for me. So it's much less about jealousy and more about lack of empathy and dominance and selfish motives. So that's if you're the partner of somebody going through this. But if you yourself are a narcissist, let's say if you relate to the description of a vulnerable narcissist, or if you have spoken with a therapist and you know that you are a vulnerable narcissist, it may be worth addressing your jealousy and finding ways to regulate that, and in that way minimizing the harm that you cause to your romantic partner. Breaking that cycle at the middle stage, finding ways to question whether your jealousy is warranted in this situation or whether it's even adaptive to act upon, can help prevent you from lashing out on your partner. If it's not, then doing things that will make you feel better about yourself, tolerating the distress, acting in the opposite way to your impulse, maybe treating your partner with some kindness and thoughtfulness instead of reacting jealously, that can be much more helpful in the long run. In the end, it may actually prevent you from being abandoned by your partner more than reacting abusively will, because that person will want to be with you more if you treat them well. Whereas if you're a grandiose narcissist, it could be beneficial to explore why you're abusing your partner in this ways and how it's actually not adaptive for you in the long run, and why it's immoral to do so, and how to take active steps to stop using those tactics. You can ask yourself, like, has this worked out for you in the past to break someone down and then be left with a shell of a partner? Wouldn't you think it would be more satisfying to be in a healthy relationship? How might you feel if someone treated you this way? Since society today functions on reciprocal relationships, don't you think it would be more effective for you to treat others well and perhaps receive the same in response? So those are some ways to apply the findings of this study to your own life, whether you are the abusive partner or the one on the receiving end. There are some drawbacks and limitations to the study, like there are to every study. So for this one, it is an Italian sample and it is a student sample, so it's not necessarily representative of the whole general population, especially not necessarily a US population. It is a self-report, so people are self-reporting things like personality and admitting emotional abuse, which normally I would think like, wow, people aren't gonna admit to that. Like, obviously the findings are gonna be skewed because they're not gonna be telling the truth. But actually the sample seemed to have no issue admitting emotional abuse. So that makes me think maybe this isn't as big of a limitation as I initially thought it might be. And it's also cross-sectional design, so causation cannot be confirmed, but it's not really relevant to our real-life applications because we don't need to know that X causes Y to know that if X and Y are correlated and Y is something very bad for us, then maybe we should stay away from X as well. So yeah, those are the limitations, but let me know if this type of shorter video where I just discussed the findings of one really interesting study and its real life applications is something you want to see more of. And if so, like, what kinds of topics would you like me to pull from? Did you relate to the study at all? Do you have any anecdotal evidence that we could learn from? Because if so, I would love to read that in the comments if you feel comfortable sharing. And yeah, I'll see you soon. Hope you have a great day.